Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling really one of the biggest questions out there in this age of endless information. How do you know what's real? I mean, really know. When you're flooded with data, claims, counterclaims, how do you sort out what you want to believe from what's actually demonstrably true? It's a strange situation, isn't it? We've got science, the whole empirical method, setting this high bar for knowledge, and yet, well, you see beliefs all around us that just don't square with the scientific consensus. And these aren't niche ideas, sometimes they're widespread, even among smart, educated people. So this gap, this tension, that's what we're exploring today, drawing heavily from Michael Shermer's really insightful book, The Believing Brain. Our goal here is to kind of give you the essence of Shermer's argument. We want to unpack the mental gears behind why we believe things, why your brain seems wired to find patterns first and maybe worry about proof later. So yeah, let's get into it.
It's a fascinating conflict, and like you said, it's not just about, fringe groups versus scientists. It's often happening inside our own heads. There's this pull between what feels comfortable, what makes sense of the world, gives us that feeling of order, and then there's the actual data, which, let's be honest, can be messy. It can be uncertain, even uncomfortable. Shermer really puts his finger on this right away. He looks at how common these, unsupported beliefs are, even when people generally understand science.
That really is the core issue, isn't it? If science is our best tool for figuring out what's true, why doesn't it always win out? It feels like our brains are running on some older, faster software, something quicker than that careful step-by-step scientific checking.
Exactly. Spot on. And that's why the framework Shermer lays out, which Sam Harris touches on in the foreword too, is so useful. It gives you a way to handle that internal conflict. He basically says, look, let's divide claims into two buckets. First, you have provable beliefs. These are the things you can actually test objectively. You can measure them, check them against evidence, like saying water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. That's provable.
Makes perfect sense. That's the playground for science, right? That first category. But it's the second category where things get trickier, more complex.
Absolutely. That's where you find the unprovable beliefs. Now, these are claims that they exert outside of that objective validation. Think about moral statements or philosophical ideas, maybe spiritual beliefs, even aesthetic judgments. That painting is beautiful. How do you prove that scientifically? And crucially, Shermer isn't saying these are automatically wrong or bad beliefs. The point is they aren't subject to the same kind of proof as scientific claims.
Okay, but I can see someone pushing back there. Isn't calling something unprovable just a way to shield it? Like, you put it in that box, and suddenly you don't have to defend it with evidence anymore.
That's a really important point to raise. But the goal of this distinction, as Shermer presents it, isn't about creating safe zones for beliefs. It's more about intellectual honesty for us, the ones evaluating the claim. If a claim is presented as provable, okay, demand the evidence, demand the testability. But if it falls into that unprovable bucket, we need to recognize that holding that belief comes down to other factors. Maybe psychological comfort, maybe cultural identity, maybe just personal preference. It forces us to admit why we believe something, especially when hard evidence isn't really the foundation. It's about knowing the source of your own conviction.
I like that. It puts the onus back on the individual believer to understand why they believe it.
Yeah.
Okay. But even if we have this tool, this way to categorize beliefs, we're still stuck with our biology, right? Our brains seem pre-programmed to jump to conclusions sometimes.
Yeah.
And this is where, for me, Shermer's argument gets really, really interesting. He says, belief isn't just some philosophical choice we make. It's almost a neurological default.
Yeah, it's like our brains are fundamentally prediction machines. They evolved for survival, and in that context, quickly spotting a potential pattern, even a false one, was often safer than missing a real one. Speed over absolute accuracy sometimes.
So finding patterns is the default setting.
You could say that. It's this tendency to find connections, impose structure. Even when we're just looking at random noise, we see it in very simple learning situations. Take the classic example Shermer might reference, the superstitious pigeon. You know this one.
Vaguely, yeah. Pigeons in a box.
Right. So imagine a pigeon in a Skinner box. Food pellets arrive at totally random times, completely unpredictable. But maybe, just by chance, right before a pellet drops, the pigeon happens to peck the floor twice, or turn in a little circle. The pigeon's brain doesn't go, oh, that was a coincidence? No way. It immediately links its action, the pecking, the turning, with the reward, the food.
Ah, so it thinks its little dance caused the food to appear. Correlation mistaken for causation.
Exactly. It develops a ritual, a superstition. Because from a survival standpoint, making that possibly false connection is less risky than potentially missing a real cause and effect that could guarantee food.
Better safe than, sorry, built right into the wiring.
That's the evolutionary logic. And we humans, we take that same basic mechanism, that same tendency, and apply it to, well, everything, much more complex stuff.
Including things way beyond pigeons and food pellets, like looking at outer space.
Precisely. Look at the examples from Mars exploration Shermer might discuss. You get these images back from rovers or orbiters, just pictures of rocks, craters, sand dunes, natural geology. But what happens? Our brains, especially the parts evolved to recognize faces and agents, they go into overdrive. They start searching that random landscape for something familiar, something meaningful.
And that's where you get things like the face on Mars.
Textbook example. It was just a mesa, a trick of light and shadow at the time the photo was taken. But because our brains are so intensely tuned to finding faces, because recognizing other humans was so important for survival, people saw a deliberate structure. An artificial monument. It's called pareidolia. Seeing patterns, faces, meaningful objects and random stimulus, clouds that look like animals, burn marks on toast that look like Elvis.
Right, so the pigeon thinks its dance brings food, and we look at a rock formation light years away and think aliens built it. It's the same basic mental habit.
Fundamentally, yes. It's the brain imposing meaning, imposing familiar patterns onto ambiguous or random input, confusing the noise with a signal.
Okay, but does this happen even when we're not looking at something ambiguous like a grainy Mars photo? What about just pure randomness right in front of us?
Oh, absolutely. And some of the other examples Shermer might use really drive this home. Think about how incredibly good your brain is at recognizing human faces. We have highly specialized neural circuits just for that. It's super fast, super efficient. We're wired to detect agency, intent, identity in faces.
Okay, got it. Face detection is a superpower.
It is. But what happens when that powerful system is kind of idling? Looking for input, but the input is just chaos.
Yeah.
Consider those images that are basically just visual static, like an old TV screen with no signal, just random black and white dots, pure noise. If you ask people to stare at that, their brain doesn't just passively register randomness, it actively works on it. It tries to find shapes, outlines, structure.
Start seeing things in the static.
Yes, people will report seeing fleeting images, maybe even faces, hidden figures. The brain is desperately trying to turn that chaos into something coherent, even if it has to invent the pattern itself.
Wow. So it's like an involuntary reflex. The brain hates pure randomness. It demands a narrative.
That seems to be the core insight. This pattern detection system is so fundamental, so automatic, it doesn't really wait for permission or even solid evidence. It generates the pattern first, and then, as Shermer explains, confirmation bias kicks in. Once we have that initial pattern or belief, we start looking for evidence that supports it and ignoring evidence that contradicts it. We build the story backwards from the conclusion we've already jumped to.
Okay, so let's tie this all together for someone listening. What's the big takeaway here? How does this help us navigate, the real world?
Well, the bottom line is that believing something, forming a conviction, isn't necessarily the end result of careful deliberation. Neurologically, it might be the starting point. It's often easier, faster, requires less mental energy for the brain to just accept a pattern, especially one that feels right or confirms what we already suspect, than it is to do the hard work of critically evaluating it. Believing can be the path of least resistance.
And we have to constantly be aware of that tendency, especially when we're dealing with complex issues, right, like politics or economics or interpreting history, places where the evidence is often murky, incomplete, or easy to twist.
Exactly. In those situations where clear empirical proof is hard to come by, our brains are highly likely to fill the gaps with patterns that serve our psychological needs, our need for certainty, for belonging, for coherence. We build the narrative we prefer.
So to quickly recap our deep dive based on Shermer's The Believing Brain. Step 1 is recognizing that core conflict, what we want to be true versus what is. Step 2 is using that distinction between provable and unprovable claims as a kind of filter.
Right. And step 3 is understanding the biology behind it all. Your brain isn't a passive receiver of information. It's an active pattern imposer, constantly trying to make sense of the world, even if it means seeing signals in the noise.
Which leads us to a final thought, maybe something provocative for our listeners to chew on.
Yeah, building on this idea. If our brains are so powerfully automatically geared towards finding patterns, towards seeing faces in the static, towards turning random pigeon movements into meaningful rituals, how often are the really strong beliefs we encounter, maybe in ourselves, maybe in others, about complex social or political issues, beliefs that seem resistant to evidence? How often are they just more sophisticated versions of seeing a face on Mars? Are they elaborate patterns our believing brain has imposed on the complex, often messy noise of reality because that pattern feels more coherent or comforting than the uncertainty? It's a tough question, but worth asking yourself. What patterns are you seeing, and are they really there?